She walked the marble floors long after everyone had left, unnoticed, unheard, invisible. But one night, what she left behind changed everything. A CEO used to power and silence, suddenly found himself face to face with a truth he never expected. And it all began with a single handwritten note. The building was silent when Linda arrived each night. Towering over the city, the glass-clad office seemed like a palace, one she could never dream of belonging to. Her worn sneakers barely made a sound on the polished floors, but her heart carried the weight of years she could never erase. Each time the elevator doors opened to the top floor, Linda inhaled deeply. That was the floor of the executives, where decisions were made, where fortunes were discussed over imported coffee. And yet, she was there for the trash cans, for the fingerprints on glass walls, for the crumbs left by people too important to care. No one knew her name. No one looked her in the eyes. To them, she was the cleaning lady, just another ghost in the night, wiping away their days so they could return to a spotless start. But Linda, she had a name, a story, a son waiting for her back home, wrapped in a blanket she stitched herself after he got sick, and school became a distant dream. Her shift started at 10 p.m., ended at 4 a.m. She worked 6 nights a week. On Sundays, she rested, not by choice, but because the building was closed. Her hands were rough from bleach, her back ached constantly, but she never complained. Complaints were for people who had options. Linda had only one: survive. She would hum softly as she cleaned, mostly old church songs her grandmother used to sing. They calmed her heart, especially on nights when the loneliness grew loud. Occasionally, she would pause by the large windows and look out over the glittering city. So much wealth, so many dreams, none of them hers. In her small purse, she carried not just cleaning cloths and gloves, but a small notepad. There, she wrote down her thoughts, not because anyone would ever read them, but because writing kept her sane. 1 page each night, letters to no one, letters to God, maybe, or to herself, just thoughts that had nowhere else to go. That night, she wrote 1 more page than usual. Her son had coughed blood earlier, and the free clinic told her to wait it out. She knew something was wrong, deeply wrong, but didn't have the money for a specialist. So she wrote it all down. Every fear, every hope, every cry she couldn't afford to scream. She tucked the paper between her notebook pages and kept it in her purse. Or so she thought. Linda didn't know that when she pulled out her gloves on the top executive floor, that page had fluttered free, landing on the desk of the CEO himself, unnoticed beneath a pile of financial reports. And when she walked out of that office at 3:58 a.m., humming Amazing Grace under her breath, she had no idea she had just changed her life forever. By day, the building was alive, phones ringing, shoes clacking, voices echoing down long hallways. But by night, it belonged to Linda. The echo of her mop, the gentle swish of her rag across desks, and the quiet buzz of vending machines were the only company she had. And strangely, she preferred it that way. In the silence, there was no one to judge her worn-out uniform or the way her knees cracked when she knelt to scrub the corners of the bathrooms. No one saw the tired lines etched deep into her face or the way she pressed a hand to her lower back every few minutes, wincing from the pain that never truly went away. Routine was her armor. She cleaned in the same order at the same pace every night. Trash first, desks second, floors last. It gave her structure, something she could control when the rest of her life felt like it was crumbling. The worst thing she could imagine was change, because change, for someone like her, usually meant disaster. She didn't speak to anyone except the other 2 cleaning ladies on the lower floors. Both spoke mostly Spanish, and though they were kind, Linda didn't want to make friends. She was afraid of getting attached, of losing focus. Her son was her entire world, and every minute spent working was a minute closer to affording the medicine he needed. Her lunch break was never more than 10 minutes. A banana, sometimes a boiled egg, water from the bathroom tap. She sat on an overturned mop bucket in the janitor's closet and stared at the same crack in the wall each night. That crack had become a friend. At least it didn't talk back or ask questions she couldn't answer. Each night, she prayed, not out loud, not dramatically, just silently in her heart. Please, Lord, just one more week, one more shift. Let me stay strong. And every time she clocked out, she whispered, "Thank you," before stepping into the cold morning air, her body aching but her spirit still holding on. The pain wasn't just physical. Linda carried memories like old bruises that never healed right. Her husband had walked out the same week her son was diagnosed. "I didn't sign up for this," he had said. And just like that, Linda learned that some people only love you when it's easy. She never heard from him again. The loneliness was the hardest part. Not the bills, not the exhaustion, but the feeling that she could disappear and no one would notice. No one would miss her. Some nights she wondered what would happen if she never showed up again. Would the office simply assign a new cleaner, forget her name, move on? But even in that darkness, Linda held on to one thing: her son's smile. Weak as he was when she came home, he still tried to sit up in bed, still said, "Hi, Mom," in that soft, hoarse voice. That smile was her sunrise, her paycheck, her hope. She had no idea that just one floor above, someone was about to notice her, really notice her, for the very first time. And everything she thought she knew about her life was about to be rewritten. Michael Bradford had it all, or so the world believed. At only 42, he was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar tech company, admired in business magazines, envied at high society events. His office overlooked the skyline, a corner suite wrapped in glass and marble, decorated with taste and minimalism. Every object had a purpose, and every purpose served success. He arrived each morning with tailored suits and left in silence, often after the last employee had already gone. No one dared ask about his personal life, and he never offered it. His calendar was packed, his phone constantly vibrating, his emails never ending. But despite the noise around him, Michael lived in a strange, sterile quiet. Employees said he was brilliant and cold, efficient and distant. His assistant once joked he had ice in his veins, but it wasn't arrogance that distanced him. It was loneliness, the kind of loneliness that grows in success like weeds in a garden. The more he achieved, the more he seemed to lose touch with anything real. He didn't know the janitors' names, not because he looked down on them, but because he had trained himself to look past what didn't concern the bottom line. Linda had cleaned his office for over a year, and he'd never once looked her in the eye. She was just a blur in the background of his climb to the top. But something had been gnawing at him lately, a kind of restlessness. He didn't sleep well. He stayed later than usual, looking over the same spreadsheets as if they held the answer to a question he couldn't even articulate. He'd built an empire, but what for? There was no one waiting at home, no family, no legacy. That particular night, Michael had returned to the office just before midnight, needing to retrieve a file he had forgotten. The building was almost empty. The security guard barely looked up. As he stepped into his suite, the smell of lemon cleaner still hung in the air. His desk, as always, was spotless, but something was different. There, near his keyboard, was a sheet of paper, lined, slightly crumpled, handwritten in pen. It wasn't his. It wasn't a memo, no letterhead, no logo, just a few lines of raw, honest handwriting. At first, he thought it was trash, but curiosity got the better of him. He picked it up and read the first sentence, then the second, and then he sat down. It wasn't just a note. It was pain, poured onto a page. Whoever wrote it hadn't meant it to be read. It spoke of fear, exhaustion, a child who couldn't breathe right, a hospital that turned them away, and a mother who felt like she was fading out of the world. Michael's throat tightened. For the first time in years, he felt something real. He read it twice, then folded it carefully. For reasons he couldn't explain, he didn't throw it away. He placed it in his drawer and sat in the darkness of his office, no longer thinking about quarterly numbers, but about the invisible woman who'd accidentally left a piece of her soul on his desk. He didn't know who she was yet, but he would find out. The following day, Michael couldn't focus. His eyes scanned contracts, investor emails, and partnership proposals, but his mind kept drifting back to the note. He'd read thousands of business reports, some emotional, some aggressive, but none had stayed with him like that page of raw honesty. That night, he stayed late again, not because of work, but because he was hoping, absurdly, that the woman would return. He didn't know what she looked like. He didn't even know her name. But something about the way she poured her pain onto paper had stirred something in him he thought had long died. At 11:42 p.m., he heard the distant hum of a cleaning cart down the hallway. His pulse quickened. He stood silently behind his office door, barely breathing. Slowly, he cracked it open and peeked down the corridor. There she was. She moved quietly, methodically, like someone who didn't want to disturb the world around her. Her uniform was faded, her shoes worn thin. She wasn't young, perhaps late 40s, maybe early 50s, but her posture, though tired, was dignified. She didn't carry herself like someone broken, just someone burdened. Michael watched her wipe the glass walls with care, her movements precise. She hummed softly, a melody he couldn't recognize, but one that felt ancient, sacred even. He suddenly realized this was the kind of woman he had never seen, not really, not beyond a glance. She entered his office without knowing he was watching. He stepped back, out of sight, heart pounding like he was doing something wrong. She didn't notice the missing paper. She simply emptied the bin, sprayed the desk, and moved in silence. Then, as she turned to leave, she paused. Just for a second. She looked at the skyline through the window, as if gathering strength. Her reflection in the glass was overlaid by the lights of the city, a tired silhouette against a world that never slowed down. Michael's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't pity. This wasn't charity. What he felt was something deeper, something like awe. She was invisible to everyone, yet she carried herself like someone who knew pain, and kept going anyway. When she disappeared down the hallway, he stepped back into his office, sat at his desk, and opened the drawer where he had hidden the note. He read it again. The words were now alive. He could hear her voice in them, see the face that had written them. He needed to know more. Who was she? What was her story? How had he been so blind to her existence all this time? And most importantly, what was he going to do with this feeling inside him that refused to fade? Michael stared at the page again that night. He'd read it so many times he knew the words by heart. But each time they hit differently, like a wound he hadn't noticed bleeding. The letter began simply, "Dear Lord, I don't know if you're still listening, but I'm still writing." It wasn't meant for him. That much was clear. It wasn't a cry for help to the world. It wasn't meant to be seen, much less understood. It was private, sacred, and that made it all the more powerful. She wrote about exhaustion, about scrubbing toilets while her son coughed himself to sleep in a small studio apartment, about wondering if she was failing him, and if God was punishing her for something she didn't remember doing. "I don't ask for miracles," she wrote. "Just a little mercy, just one door that opens." Michael felt the tightness in his chest again. That word, mercy, echoed in his mind longer than anything else. He was a man who opened doors for a living, but only for the right people, the qualified ones, the ones who could add value, not for someone who cleaned offices at night. And yet, She had added more value to his soul in a single sheet of paper than any boardroom genius ever had. He looked up her personnel file using the ID tag she had accidentally left on the desk weeks earlier. Linda Harper, age 49, part-time contract, no benefits, emergency contact listed as NA. He stared at the word NA for a long time. No one. She had no one. He called HR the next day under the pretense of an internal audit. Just need to verify some contractor info, he'd said. But really, he wanted to know more. No sick days taken, no complaints filed, no requests ever submitted. Model employee, they said. Quiet, dependable, invisible. That last word echoed in his mind like a bell. That night, he stayed again. Not in his office this time, but in the hallway, hidden, watching, waiting. She arrived as usual, no sign that anything was different. She went about her work with care, like every detail mattered, and to her, it did. It was her job, yes, but it was also the one place she still had control. In a world where so much had been taken from her, cleaning was her quiet rebellion against chaos. When she reached his office, he stepped out slowly. "Excuse me," he said softly. She froze. Her eyes widened, hands still holding the rag. I didn't mean to disturb you, sir," she said, startled. "You didn't," he replied. "I just wanted to ask you something." Linda blinked, unsure. No one had ever spoken to her this way. Not here. Not someone like him. Michael hesitated. "Did you lose a piece of paper? A note, maybe?" Her eyes immediately filled with panic. "A note?" "I found it on my desk," he said gently. "I read it. I shouldn't have. I'm sorry. But it moved me." She looked away, ashamed. "It wasn't meant for anyone. Just something I write to keep from falling apart." Michael nodded, silent. And in that moment, something passed between them. Not words, not pity, but recognition. The kind that comes when two people from opposite worlds suddenly find themselves standing in the same kind of pain. After that night, something shifted in Michael. He couldn't explain it, not even to himself. The woman who had always existed in the background of his world now occupied the forefront of his thoughts. And it wasn't because of guilt or even fascination. It was something far deeper, a connection he hadn't expected. He didn't see her for a few nights after their brief encounter. Her schedule had changed slightly, and he didn't want to press. But every time he stepped into his office, he searched for signs of her. A mist rag stroke, the smell of cleaning solution, a humming echo down the hallway. All of it reminded him of Linda. One night he lingered in the office late, pretending to work. At 1:30 a.m., he heard the cleaning cart rolling faintly. He walked out slowly, not wanting to scare her this time. She looked up as he approached, unsure whether to smile or disappear. "I wanted to apologize again," he said gently, "for reading something that wasn't mine." Linda nodded, her voice low. "It's okay. I shouldn't have left it there." He hesitated. "Can I ask you something?" She blinked, unsure. "Why do you write them?" She looked down at her gloves. "Because talking doesn't help. People don't really listen. But paper does. God does." She paused. "Or at least, I like to think he does." Michael didn't know what to say. He'd built an empire on communication, branding, negotiation, influence. But this woman, with her plain words and aching honesty, had just shown him what it meant to actually say something that mattered. He began looking forward to their brief conversations, a few words exchanged in quiet hallways, observations about life. She never spoke about her personal struggles unless he asked. And even then she held back, as if too much sharing would break the fragile balance she'd built. He didn't push. Instead, he started learning from observation. The way she winced every time she bent down too fast. The way she rubbed her hands at the joints, as if arthritis had already made a home there. The way her smile tried to mask the weight of sorrow underneath. Michael found himself slipping into a strange rhythm. By day, he ran a corporation. By night, he waited for a woman who taught him what it meant to endure. He started noticing more than just Linda. The security guard who always stood a little straighter when he passed. The receptionist who smiled brightly, but always left 10 minutes early to catch the last bus. The world he had overlooked for years was finally revealing itself to him. And it all began with one woman's letter. Back in his office, he opened his drawer and reread the page for the 50th time. But now, it wasn't just words. It was a map, a clue, a cry that wouldn't let him rest. He began to wonder, what would it look like to answer a prayer meant only for God? It was a Thursday night when it happened, the moment neither of them would forget. The office was quieter than usual. A light drizzle painted the windows with streaks of silver. Linda moved through the building like always, focused, distant, humming under her breath. But when she stepped into the executive hallway, he was already there. Michael wasn't sitting at his desk or pacing through a call. He was just standing near the large window at the end of the corridor, hands in his pockets, looking out at the city. She almost turned around, unsure if she should enter. But something made her pause. Their eyes met, just briefly. A flicker of something human, raw and unguarded, passed between them. He gave a small nod. Not formal, not CEO-like. Just a man acknowledging someone who mattered. She lowered her eyes respectfully and stepped into his office, moving quietly as ever. But her rhythm was off. Her heart was beating faster, her thoughts scattered. She could feel his presence down the hall, like a weight she wasn't used to carrying. Michael, for his part, didn't move. He watched the reflection of her silhouette in the glass. The woman who used to be invisible now stood at the center of his awareness. He didn't speak, he didn't interrupt. But his silence wasn't cold, it was full. She finished cleaning and turned to leave. As she passed him, he said softly, "Do you ever get time to rest?" The question caught her off guard, not because of what it was, but because of how he asked it. Not like a boss, not like someone making small talk, but like someone who genuinely cared. She looked at him for a moment, unsure whether to answer. "Rest isn't something I can afford right now," she said plainly. Then gently, "But thank you for asking." And with that, she walked away. Michael stood still, the quiet echo of her words ringing in his ears. Rest isn't something I can afford. He went back into his office and sat down, staring at the framed awards on his wall. Each one marked success, growth, milestones, and yet not a single one had ever made him feel the way that one sentence had. That night, he couldn't sleep. He kept hearing her voice, seeing the tired dignity in her eyes. He didn't know what this was, wasn't sure if it was admiration, guilt, curiosity, or something else entirely. But he knew one thing. She was no longer just the cleaning lady. She was Linda. And somehow, without meaning to, she had become the most important mystery in his world. Michael wasn't used to not knowing things. In business, he anticipated problems before they happened. In meetings, he always had the answer. But when it came to Linda, he realized how little he understood about the world beyond his own glass walls. Over the next few days, curiosity turned into a quiet obsession. He found himself asking questions he'd never imagined asking, not just about her, but about all the people like her who passed through his building unnoticed. But with Linda, it was personal. He started discreetly speaking with the night supervisor of janitorial services. Nothing invasive, just enough to piece together a picture. "She's been here almost 2 years, the man said. Never missed a shift unless it was for her boy." Her boy? Michael asked, trying to sound casual. Yeah, he's sick, real sick. She's strong though, doesn't talk much, just works, like a machine, but kinda. Those words stayed with him. Strong, but kinda. That weekend, Michael drove to a part of the city he hadn't visited in years, not since his college days when he was still struggling, still connected to the world in a human way. He parked in front of a rundown apartment building with cracked walls and a flickering porch light. The address had been easy to find, buried in her outdated HR file. He didn't go in. He just watched. Through a small window, he saw her, Linda, sitting beside a thin boy on a worn couch, reading from a children's Bible. Her voice barely reached his ears through the glass, but the softness in her tone was unmistakable. The boy, pale and frail, rested against her arm, as if it were the only place in the world that still made sense. Michael swallowed hard. He'd negotiated million-dollar contracts without blinking. But this hit different. The quiet strength of a mother with no help, no husband, no insurance, and no room for weakness. Back at the office, he opened a document titled Emergency Corporate Funds, a policy he had written himself for unexpected employee hardship. But she didn't qualify. Contract workers weren't included. He had written that rule too. His own rules now tasted like rust. He called HR and asked what it would take to convert a contract employee into a full-time one. They hesitated. Well, sir, she's not the kind of candidate we usually promote. What kind is that? He asked, his tone calm but sharp. There was silence on the line. That night when Linda arrived, Michael waited by the elevator. She jumped slightly when she saw him. Is everything okay? She asked, immediately worried. He nodded. I just wanted to say, thank you for what you wrote, for who you are. She blinked, confused. I don't understand. You will, he said softly. I promise. And with that, he walked away. But not from her. Not from her story. From now on, he would walk toward it. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a man can do is simply listen to the truth of someone who was never meant to be heard. It started with glances, just a few at first, unnoticed by Linda, but impossible for Michael to ignore. An assistant raising an eyebrow as he lingered a moment too long near the janitorial closet. A manager pausing mid-sentence when he asked about building maintenance. Small things, subtle, but growing. Whispers, like smoke, found their way through the hallways. Is it true? Why is the CEO talking to the cleaning lady? Maybe she found something on him. Maybe it's charity, or something else. People in the office had long admired Michael Bradford for his discipline, his detachment, his unshakable focus. Now they saw cracks, and through those cracks, they saw something unfamiliar. Human interest, emotional engagement, compassion, and it made them uncomfortable. Linda, for her part, noticed the change too. Not at first. She was used to being ignored. But then came the side eyes, the false smiles, the paused conversations when she entered a room. She was no longer invisible, but visibility came with a price. One night, as she emptied a trash can near the marketing department, 2 interns walked by, whispering just loud enough. Maybe she's blackmailing him, or maybe she's some long-lost cousin or something. Ew, what if he's like in love with her? Linda's cheeks burned. She didn't cry. She didn't react. She just kept working, hands trembling slightly beneath her gloves. Michael heard it too, the gossip. It reached his ears during a board meeting, when one of the senior partners chuckled. Heard you've taken an interest in janitorial affairs, Mike. Need a change of pace? The room laughed. Michael didn't. That woman, he said calmly, works harder than anyone on this floor, including some people in this room. The laughter died instantly. No one joked again. Still, he knew this was a problem. Perception, in the world of power, mattered almost as much as truth. But for the first time in his career, he didn't care. Because what was unfolding between him and Linda wasn't a scandal. It was a revelation. One that was slowly waking something long dormant inside him. He started leaving small gestures. A real lunch in the janitor's closet. A new set of gloves in her supply cart. A heater for the cold storage room where she took breaks. Never with a note. Never with a name. But she knew. She always knew. And one night, after finding a fresh meal and a folded sweater waiting for her again, Linda looked toward the executive floor with tears in her eyes. Not from pity, not from shame, but from something else she hadn't felt in years. Dignity. The morning started like any other. Rain tapping gently on the windows. The city yawning to life beneath layers of fog. Linda had finished her shift at dawn, just as always, and hurried home, hoping to catch her son before the fever came back. But when she opened the door, the silence was wrong. Heavy. Thick. He wasn't in bed. He was on the floor. Pale. Unresponsive. His lips slightly blue. Her heart stopped. She called 911 with shaking hands, holding his body in her arms, whispering prayers she could barely form. The paramedics arrived within minutes, but time had already shifted, bending into panic, blurring everything around her. "No insurance?" one of them asked. She shook her head. "We'll take him to County General." County General, overcrowded, underfunded, and not equipped for what her son needed. Linda rode in the ambulance, holding her boy's hand, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. Her face was calm, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she had to be strong. She'd been strong for so long, she didn't know how else to be. When they arrived, she waited alone in a cold plastic chair, surrounded by coughing strangers, bright fluorescent lights, and the constant beeping of machines. Hours passed. Doctors moved in and out. No one looked her in the eye. Then the nurse approached with a clipboard and a grim look. "He's stable, but he needs to be transferred to a facility with pediatric pulmonary specialists. We can't keep him here." "But where?" Linda asked, her voice cracking. The nurse hesitated. "St. Eliza's. Private. But they don't take uninsured transfers." Linda's legs gave out. She sank to the floor, her mind spiraling. She thought of calling someone, but there was no one. No family, no friends, no one who would pick up, except one name kept rising in her mind. A name she had no right to call. Still, she did. She pulled out her phone, found his number in the company directory, the one listed only for emergencies. Her hands trembled. She didn't even know why she was calling, but she pressed the button. He picked up on the first ring. "Linda?" His voice was alert, concerned. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't know who else to call. It's my son. He's not breathing right. They're saying I can't. They won't take him." "Where are you?" Michael asked, already grabbing his keys. "County General. I'm on my way." 15 minutes later he arrived, not in a suit, not with an entourage, just a man with purpose and fire in his eyes. He didn't ask questions. He didn't hesitate. He marched to the desk and said 3 words. "Transfer. I'll cover." St. Eliza's prepared the room immediately. An ambulance was dispatched. Within the hour, her son was moved, stabilized, and breathing easier. Linda stood in the hallway, stunned, speechless, watching Michael as he signed the forms and handled the chaos with the grace of a man who'd finally found something real to fight for. Later, as they sat in silence outside the recovery room, she finally spoke. "Why are you doing this?" He looked at her with eyes that held no pity, only truth. "Because I see you now." The morning after the hospital transfer, the office buzzed with nervous energy. Whispers floated from cubicles to coffee machines, speculations bouncing off every wall. "He left in the middle of the night," someone said. "He took her kid to a private hospital," another added. The building had never felt smaller, but Michael didn't care. He arrived later that day with no tie, no laptop bag, no meetings on his schedule. His mind was set on something far more important than quarterly projections. He walked straight into the boardroom and closed the door behind him. When the executives gathered, expecting another pitch or a strategic update, he gave them neither. Instead, he stood before them and said, "There's a woman working nights in this building who has shown more integrity, more strength, and more humanity than anyone I've ever met in this company." They exchanged glances, confused. "Her name is Linda Harper," he continued, "and starting today, she's not just a cleaning contractor. She's our new community support liaison." "Excuse me?" one of the directors asked. Michael nodded. "She'll be full-time, with full benefits, paid better than most entry-level roles, and she'll work directly with me to help us create programs that support overlooked staff, cleaning crews, cafeteria workers, security, the people we never notice until we need them." Another exec scoffed. "You're rewriting policy for a janitor?" Michael's tone sharpened. "I'm rewriting it because we've been wrong for a long time." Back at the hospital, Linda sat beside her son's bed, unaware of the firestorm her story had lit. She held his hand while he slept peacefully, breathing through the soft hiss of a proper oxygen machine, the kind she'd never dreamed he could access. A few hours later, Michael walked in with a folder. He handed it to her quietly. She opened it. Inside, she found a new ID badge, a full-time employee contract, health insurance information, and a handwritten note that read, "Your strength deserves more than silence. You changed me. Now let me help change things for you." Tears streamed down her face. She tried to speak, but no words came. Only a quiet sob, muffled by her hand. Michael didn't try to stop it. He just sat beside her, a man who had everything, finally feeling like he was part of something real. Because sometimes, the greatest gesture isn't writing a check. It's rewriting the rules. 3 months had passed since that stormy night when Michael made the decision that changed both their lives. Linda was no longer the silent figure pushing a cart down marble floors. She now walked the halls in daylight, with a badge that bore her name and title, and with eyes that finally looked forward, not just down. She still worked hard. That part of her would never change. But now her efforts were seen, valued, and multiplied. She coordinated food drives, arranged transportation for night workers, even set up emergency support for employees who, like her, had once fallen through the cracks. Her son, now stable and improving, had begun to laugh again, a sound she thought she'd lost forever. He had drawings taped all over his bedroom wall now. One of them showed a tall building with tiny windows, and a stick figure in a blue dress standing next to another in a suit, both smiling. On a quiet Monday morning, long before the building filled with noise, Michael arrived early. He liked it that way now. The silence had become sacred, a moment of reflection. But something caught his eye as he entered his office. There was a single sheet of paper on his desk, folded neatly, unmarked, familiar. He unfolded it slowly, already feeling the weight of what it might be. It wasn't typed. It was handwritten, just like the first one, but this time the words were different. "Dear Mr. Bradford, I don't know how to thank you. Not just for what you did, but for seeing me when no one else ever did. You didn't just give me a job. You gave me back my dignity, my voice. You answered a prayer I wasn't brave enough to speak aloud. There were nights I thought I was disappearing, becoming part of the background. But you stopped, you turned, and you listened, and that changed everything. My son asked me yesterday if you were an angel. I told him no. I told him you were just a man. but the kind who makes miracles possible. Thank you for not throwing away my words. With all my heart, Linda. Michael folded the letter slowly, pressing his hand to it as if trying to hold on to something invisible, something sacred. He didn't cry easily, but that morning he let a tear fall, not out of sadness, but because something inside him had finally healed. He placed the letter in a frame beside his many awards, not above them, not below, just next to them, equal. Because no title, no recognition, no accolade he had ever earned meant more than this. He had been seen, just like he had finally seen her. How many Lindas have you seen, but never truly noticed? This isn't just a story about an unlikely connection. It's a reminder that sometimes the greatest changes begin in silence, in the background where no one's looking. Michael had power, influence, and wealth. But it wasn't until he stopped to listen, truly listen, that he became something greater, human. And you? Have you ever paused to notice someone the world tries so hard to ignore? Tell us in the comments. Have you ever met someone who changed your life without even knowing it? Or maybe, are you that someone? If this story touched your heart, please consider leaving a super thanks. Your financial support helps this channel keep telling stories that matter, stories that uplift, inspire, and give voice to those often forgotten. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that could change your day, or maybe even your life. And before you go, click the video on your screen to watch another emotional journey like this one. We'll see you there.